Treaties are agreements between the Crown and Indigenous peoples that confirm arrangements of peaceful coexistence, land and resource sharing, and recognize each party's authority or jurisdiction.
Treaty is a fundamental expression of relationship. So treaty is the base of developing an agreement to work together. What's interesting is Indigenous nations prior to contact were developing treaties all across Turtle Island, amongst themselves, inside of the nations, with other nations, with nations of non-human beings, so animal nations. And then when the Crown kind of comes along and starts making treaties, this is not something that's foreign to Indigenous people. It's actually a long established practice within the territory of Turtle Island.
Although treaties were made between the Crown and First Nations, they mean different, often vastly different things on each side. Understanding Indigenous perspectives and oral versions of treaties can help us better uphold those promises today.
Treaties could take any number of form, right? They don't need to look any one particular way. We have treaties with all sorts of beings in this world, but in that context of Crown Indigenous relations, historic treaties were viewed as being a purchase of land, I suppose.
We didn't see ourselves as separate from the lands and waters. We were talking about those animals and all of those plants and medicines out there that we rely upon. That was what was informing the way that we were negotiating, and what we were negotiating about was the very future of the world.
The treaties that Indigenous nations have made with the Crown are about sharing of land and building peaceful coexistence relationships.
When agreements were made, they centered on peace building. Our nations made oral agreements, which are represented through wampum belts, that communicate peaceful relations between nations, either with the Dutch and the French or the English.
Elders in my region don't talk about signing a treaty. They actually talk about making a treaty, because it's so much more than a signature on a piece of paper. Treaties are the basis for legitimate settler presence within the territory.
Those are foundations to how one is to be in relationship with the other. And that includes lands and waters.
Treaties are built on the basis of reciprocity, renewal, respect, and those are core factors in understanding what a good relationship is meant to be.
In some areas of Canada, there have been no treaty negotiations, and in some areas, negotiations are ongoing.
When you have this discussion or discourse around unceded, you can go to the basic definition, which is we didn't sign it away, we didn't give it away, it was taken from us. When the Crown came and staked their flag, and all of a sudden we're now Canada, well, you have people that have been here for thousands of years. And the courts have recognized the fact that Indigenous peoples were here prior to Crown asserting sovereignty. We have prior occupation. We have been here for thousands of years. Just because we were pushed away and pushed out of our lands and resources doesn't mean that we don't have a role and a responsibility to manage those lands and resources.
Modern treaties define new relationships between Indigenous peoples and the state. Treaties continue to be negotiated in places where they don't historically exist, like, for example, as part of the BC treaty process.
Modern treaty is, I would say, it's not just a contract over lands and resources. It is a relationship between the provincial government, the federal government, and the First Nations. And there's a component of land management that is now under the Treaty Nations' control and jurisdiction. And there's a multitude of partnerships that are created between a modern treaty nation and local government, because they also have to plan together. And that just solidifies sort of everyone's roles and responsibilities when it comes to that treaty nation being now self-governing.
The push for self-government was always intended to get to a place where we were going to have a treaty. All things being equal, we ended up going down the pathway of trying to figure out how to set up a governance model that we could understand. And it was based loosely on a municipal model. We went through the treaty process and walked away from it because it didn't give us what we were looking for.
The first Inuit modern treaty was the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement in 1975, and that was spurred on by the Quebec government's interest in developing a massive hydroelectric project in northern Quebec. The Inuvialuit Final Agreement was in 1984, and again in the specter of the Mackenzie Valley Pipeline and broad oil and gas expansion in the Western Arctic, there was a need for governments to work quickly to try to create safe spaces for natural resource extraction. And at the time, these were highly contentious ways to move forward, but necessary in consideration of the spaces that we found ourselves in.
Most would say that compromise was inherent in almost all treaty negotiations, both historic and modern.
I find that the negotiation process and what the vision the Crown has is no different than it had been perhaps in the early 20th century. The end of the numbered treaties themselves is that it would leave Indigenous peoples with very little and ensure the Crown had successfully colonized the territory.
Being able to access those resources within our territories, I think, is incredibly important. And that's part of what the work through a modern treaty negotiation provides, but it's also about reconciliation. And so not every nation is going to be involved in treaty negotiations. They have their own vision of self-determination, of self-governance, and we have to support that.
It's important to understand that these modern treaties were and are the best way for Inuit to interact with the Crown, so as to protect our self-determination and interject Inuit decision-making and co-management into spaces where none existed previously. I think Inuit leaders recognized that these deals were not optimal, but in many cases they were very necessary in that point in time to create positive incremental change, and change that we're still building on today.